Good evening, everyone. Alright, my name is Carl. I wrote Hunters of the Silver Hills, and it's kind of like a mystery game couched in RPG mechanics, kind of think like Dungeons and Dragons meets like some other rules-light systems. And I just wanted to walk with you real quick some of the basics of the mechanics. This is by no means really a comprehensive sort of video. This is just meant to walk through some of the rules in the manual, which there'll be a link for in the description below, to give you a better idea what I mean, or so you can use this video as a reference guide for how each mechanic is supposed to be used. Okay, real quick, so what you're going to want for play, there's a number of character cards in the book. You're going to want to either make copies of those, or somehow do like a digital version to make that your own. And you're going to want at least one for each player. I really recommend using a different one for each player. You're going to want a number of D10 dice, a standard deck of playing cards with only one joker shuffled in, a map, some kind of token for that map, definitely some pencils and something to write with or keep notes. Okay, so let's start with dice rolling. We are gonna demonstrate a couple of odds and ends here. So every roll in the game is going to start as 2d10 or two 10-sided dice. There are different factors that are going to modify how many dice you have in this pool, and that is going to primarily be character skills, which we'll get into more detail when we go over the character card. Once you've determined how many dice you're going to roll, let's say in this case it's 3, you're just going to go ahead, roll all those at once, and your objective is to get the highest possible result you can. Your result is determined by the values of the different faces of the die. So each value of a 5 or better is going to give you +1 to your roll, or +1 to your result rather, and any value of 4 or fewer is going to not affect your result at all. If you happen to be very lucky and get 2 rolls of 10 in a single roll, your result goes up by an additional +1. So let's say I have a 5 and 2 10s here. I would have 1 for the 10, 1 for the 5, 1 for my other 10, and then an additional 1 for having a pair of 10s. That would give me a total of 4 out of 3 dice. Similarly, if I got 2 1s, I would have +1 from my 5, +0 from my 1, +0 from my other 1, and then -1 for having pairs of 1s. So my result would actually be 0 even though I got the 5 here. Okay, and that's really like the basics of dice rolling. The game is designed that players are never going to need more than 5 dice total at any given time, and the game master is never going to need more than 6 dice, but is very much welcome to include more dice if he wishes. So let me introduce you to the mechanic of fate. So fate is represented by the deck of playing cards here, and there's something called the fate table in the game manual. Now I highly recommend you modify the consequences of the fate table in your game, but you can use the one in the manual as a starting point or as is. So what you're going to do is, for a number of reasons, players are going to do what's called tempting fate. And when this happens, fate gets a fate card, and then the game master is going to roll 6d10 and determine what the result is. If the result is fewer than the number of fate cards on the table, fate is going to act primarily with the player who angered fate as its target. So fate is tempted, you place the card, you roll the dice, the target is going to be the player who tempted fate, and if fate does not act, then the player succeeds at whatever it was they were trying to do, and we'll go over that in more detail as well. So let's say we got a bunch of cards on the table, and then the game master makes their roll, and oh no, you've rolled fewer than the number of cards on the table. What we're going to do now is reveal each of the cards, and we're going to compare them to the fate table. So generally, numbered cards are going to have either a damage value or not so negative value to stress or health, or rather injuries, which is something related to the character cards here. And then face cards are going to have special effects that are listed on that table. These special effects can prompt the players to do various things, and if the player gets a joker, then the character who angered fate with the joker is doomed to die by the end of the session. And that's something that is not recoverable from, unlike most other circumstances that we will kind of touch on. Once fate has acted and all consequences have been determined, you're going to reshuffle that deck, and fate's hand is going to once again be emptied. So okay, what tempts fate? The main thing that's going to be tempting fate is when any kind of magic user utilizes their magic. Now the game manual describes specifically that certain things like an oracle's ability to divine, a detective's ability to access the fractured rite of divination, or a hunter's deep sight that does not provoke fate. Those are not dark magics. Any use of dark magic will provoke or tempt fate. So the practitioner, for example, instead of having spell slots or mana or anything like that, whenever he tries to cast a new spell off of his features here, he is tempting fate. And so cards are going to get put on the table. Now something that's important about that is all players are linked together by fate. Fate is kind of this unifying force that wants the players to cooperate and really manage how much they're making fate angry. Now, as far as spellcasting goes in particular, the reason that it is this way is because spellcasting is really, really vague, for players at least. The practitioner has access to kinds of spells, but there's no real limit on what these spells can do or the scope that they're going to affect. It's completely possible for the practitioner, for example, to say cast a spell that allows him to levitate for the remainder of the mystery, but a lot of that is going to be up to the GM's discretion. The Game Master is in total control about what is and is not possible in your given mystery that you're solving. And it's very much recommended that you communicate with the Game Master about what the scope of what you're going to be able to do is communicated. But okay, let's go over these character cards in a little more detail. So right here at the top, you have the title of the card. In this case, it's the Practitioner. And you have an empty name slot. Now, these cards are written so that once you've selected one as a player, you're in the game. You've picked, okay, I want to be this guy, you're that guy, you're in the game. Until you get a name, you could just go by the title. So, okay, it's me. Hey, it's me, I'm the Practitioner. What's up, my fellow hunters? Over here on the opposite of the card, you're going to have a variety of different kind of groups of some kind. There is no alignment or morality system in Hunters of the Silver Hills, but the group that's listed there is going to indicate the agency or entity that you're responsible to. So in the case of the Practitioner, he is an element of the College of Hunters. He's going to really want to make sure that whatever he does, it's in the interest of the College of Hunters because he is going to be held accountable by the college, although this may not come up until the end of the mystery. Now below all this, you have a nice little blurb here, and that's going to describe what it's like being that kind of character, or maybe even introduce certain mechanics, such as with the scout or the driver. So I highly recommend you read those thoroughly. Finally, or rather not finally, but next we have the drama. There are 3 options to pick from. You are more than welcome to mark more than one off, but these are just statements, phrases, thoughts, things your character might say that are going to act as a platform or just an element to incorporate into your character's personality. These don't actually have any kind of mechanical benefit for selecting one over the other, but they are great for providing structure for how your character might interact with the world. Adjacent to that, we have your proficiency here, and your proficiency is actually one of 2 selections. You can only mark one of these legally, and once you've marked one, what you get to do is, if you're going to do something that might require a roll, so you're performing some kind of challenge, it's like, okay, hey, I'm the Practitioner, and I have summoning here as my proficiency. So I want to summon some kind of creature to help me out with whatever's going on. Okay, the GM says, this is an urgent spell, such and such circumstances. I want you, the difficulty 4 for that to happen right there. I'm going to look at my skills and I'm going to see, okay, well, I don't really consider this summon to be related to any of my skills. That's going to make this roll greatly in my favor. And I really don't want to risk trying to get the best result of a 3 off of 2d10. So what I'm going to do instead is say, okay, well, you told me it was difficulty 4. Summoning is my proficiency. I'm going to mark off 4 stress instead. So I'm going to mark 4. Let's assuming I had no stress marked. And then I just succeed. And similarly, if maybe the characters come across some kind of ritual site or something, the practitioner might be able to use his proficiency of summoning to identify if this ritual site's purpose was for summoning without performing any kind of roll. He can just spend a number of stress negotiated between him and the GM to indicate what that cost is going to be. Now there's other things that can happen with stress, but we'll get into that in a moment. Okay, so your skills. There's a value next to each of your skills, and depending on what that value is how many dice you're going to add to that base 2d10 roll. So for a practitioner, his lethal magics are his best rated skill here. He is very much meant to be kind of a fighting type. He wants to slaughter things. So okay, I want to cast like a magic missile or a laser, or I want to do a lightning bolt, whatever. Yeah, you get to make up what exactly that is. In the case of the practitioner, he's going to draw a fate card. He's going to tempt fate because he's casting a black or dark magic. And then it's going to proceed to add those 3 dice to his roll and roll to determine the result of the effectiveness of his attack. We'll go over combat in a little more detail in a little bit. I kind of want to go down the line for now on the character card. So there's also a blank spot here on your character card. And what you can do with that is really write in any skill that you think would be appropriate for your character to have. Once you've filled that in, feel free to change that as you need, so long as you haven't used it to roll for anything yet. Once you have, you're really locked in until the story or some other element allows you to maybe change that if you need to. Below that you have your features. Now features don't provide any kind of numerical advantage. Features are tools, utilities, they're features that allow your character to interact with, or experience the world in ways that others cannot. Most cards are going to have a blank spot here on your feature list, and you feel free, when you're ready to fill it in, I highly recommend you talk with your GM about what kind of feature is going to best work with the mystery that you guys are solving. Over here we have our stress and injury track and table respectively. So we've already gone over that stress can be accrued by purchasing a success using your proficiency that you've chosen, but stress can also be forced upon you. Handling cursed objects, seeing terrible, horrifying things, or really anything else the Game Master deems stressful, like staying up all night, might give you a number of stress that the Game Master is going to use his discretion to decide you gain. Depending on the kind of stress you accrue, so for example staying up all night, you might even acquire some kind of injury, such as the common illness injury here on the injury table. Or if you've maxed out your stress and you accrue some other kind of stress, it might just not even affect you. But otherwise, generally, if you have stress you can gain, and you do gain it, and you've not exceeded your maximum, it's not going to overflow into your injuries at all. As for your injuries, let's do an example of combat really quick. So I have a number of injuries here, and they each have a value associated with their row, and each column represents a different kind of injury. So here I have, in the case of the practitioner, I have disease, some kind of damage to my body, and then like a specific part of my body or action that is hindered. So okay, I need to make an attack. I'm fist fighting somebody. I'm not very good at fist fighting, so it's 2d10. I don't really have any of these skills that apply to that, and I don't want to fill in my skill for fist fighting. I roll, I get a 0 result, and the monster that I'm fighting rolls against me in that combat, and the monster scores a total result of 2. Now, if I declared that I'm maybe fighting a certain way, or whatever the circumstance is, the Game Master might rule that I do defeat the monster or beat up this, drunk patron or whatever it may be, but I'm going to accrue that 2 damage that overflowed my result. So okay, now I've got this 2 damage coming in, and now I need to buy off that damage using appropriate injuries on my injury table here. I'm probably not going to get some kind of disease by getting punched in the face, but I might get a bad eye from getting socked, get a black eye, you get socked, it swells up. Great explanation. So okay, I'm going to mark that off. I have a bad eye. Well, now whenever I need to do something that might be hindered by me having a bad eye, such as maybe trying to notice some kind of detail, utilize some kind of long-range spell, or picking up a sniper rifle and trying to use the scope on it, or maybe even trying to flirt with somebody, and I have this egregious-looking black eye on my face, that's going to hinder my result by the value in the roll. That value also is going to indicate how many days it's going to take of rest to recover once that injury has been treated properly. So using your discretion, you may require the character to be completely bedridden, or maybe just restricted to light activity, or in some cases, they're totally free to move around. It's just going to take a matter of time. So in the case of the bad eye, or in having received a black eye, I'd get my eye looked at, I'd treat it with some kind of therapy, or maybe get some kind of medicine to help with swelling, and go about my day for 2 days. And after the start of the third day, you'd be able to unmark that injury. Injuries only heal one at a time, though. So if I'm working on that bad eye, I unmark the bad eye, and I have another injury, say, in the 3 slot, I'll need to wait an additional 3 days to heal whatever injury was there. Finally, on that track, we have the mortal wound. So mortal wounds can be marked off, say if you receive a tremendous amount of damage and you don't want to mark off a bunch of injuries. You can check that. It'll buy off all the damage you have incoming. If you're not able to buy off the damage that you have incoming, you must mark the mortal wound. And if you've accrued a total of -6 modifier points, you also must mark off the mortal wound. Once you're mortally wounded, your character is on the track for death. Depending on the context of the story, you may not immediately die, or you may immediately die. It's just going to be up to what makes the most sense at that given time. But really, unless otherwise prevented, your character is going to perish. A character with a mortal wound dies if they are abandoned, executed, or if they cannot be stabilized for 1 full day. Once they have been stabilized for a full day, you can go ahead and unmark the mortal wound at the start of the next day, and then proceed to heal any other wounds as you see fit. Now, wounds or injuries can be, if they're healed supernaturally, you receive some kind of medicine or antidote that cures the specific ailment you're under. Use your discretion. The story is going to take precedent. The character, you can immediately unmark wounds that are treated with such appropriate, immediately relieving elixirs, first aid kits, what have you. Moving on, we have vices. Every character is going to have a couple of vices already built in, and then there's going to be a slot to fill in your own. Vices are dangerous or risky behavior that are meant to reduce your stress. So you can indulge in your vice once per day. It takes 30 minutes uninterrupted to indulge in your vice. And once you do, you can reduce your stress by 1. You may indulge in your vice additional times, but further indulgences in your vice become abuses. For every abuse, if you choose to abuse, you're going to tempt fate, so fate gets a card, and then you're going to roll 2d10, so a base roll. You're going to reduce your stress by the result that you've rolled. So generally you're going to only reduce your stress by 1, but there's a pretty good chance that you could score a second result with a possibility of a third. Or you may even increase your stress. When you're ready to fill in your own vice, if you'd like, given, say, a circumstance where you're not able to fulfill either 2 of your other vices, or you'd like a free additional vice to serve as an indulgence, so you can score -3 stress in 1 day without an abuse, talk with your GM about what you'd like to do. The vice should be something that, if abused, either directly harms you or puts you in a situation where you could be harmed. So that if fate acts, the consequence can somehow be directly tied to the vice that you were abusing at the time. Alright, moving on to the final part of the character card, you have your Flourish. Your Flourish is a once per session use, authoritative tool that you can invoke, and generally these are really relatively powerful abilities. So in the case of a practitioner, they get to cast a very big spell at no temptation of fate whatsoever. So the practitioner might do something on a much larger scale than normally discussed in the scope of his spells. And really all that's going to be described right on your character card, the title of your flourish, and then a blurb outlining what is most appropriate to use that flourish with or in what situation. And it's really in the GM is recommended when you state that you're going to use a flourish, that they negotiate with you how to best utilize the flourish in the situation that you're utilizing it in. But all right, moving on. The map is a key component of Hunters of the Silver Hills. Time management is super important to solving these mysteries, as the creature you're often hunting, or the creature that is your quarry, is going to have his own timeline and schedule that he's acting on, independent of whatever it is that your team of hunters is doing to stop it. So generally you're going to start the game at some point in the map at some time of day, and then every time you move, time is going to pass depending on the kind of tile that you're moving into. So there's two kinds of tiles. You have untamed or wild, that term is used relatively interchangeably, and then you have civilized or civil. So roads, towns, buildings, farms, anything that is touched by society and well organized so that people can navigate through it, moving into that tile is going to cost you 1 hour. Moving into an untamed or wild tile, such as a river, plains, forest, mountain area, whatever it is going to cost you 2 hours. So for example, if you start at this edge of the map at the beginning of the day, let's say 7 a.m., and you want to get to this sanctuary here, you're going to go 1, 2 hours, and you arrive at the peak of 9 a.m. Other things that you do may cost time at the discretion of the game master, such as, let's say you interview an NPC. At the end of the interview, the game master may say, okay, we'll call that 5 minutes of time. Other classes, such as the scout and driver, can manipulate how much time is spent traveling into different kinds of tiles, and for other reasons, characters may be able to more expeditiously complete tasks that would otherwise cost time for other characters. Let's say, for example, some characters who are not very proficient with lockpicking wanted to pick something, and they have the appropriate tools. Well, if you have the tools, really picking a lock is not the most complicated task if you have a vague idea of how to do it. So you can say, well, I guess it'll just cost you 30 minutes or even maybe an hour of time of just fiddling around with this lock until you pop it open. Challenges should not be required of tasks that can be completed just by spending enough time on them. Challenges should really only be invoked if there's going to be a consequence for failure, or if failing the task means you cannot repeat it again. And that's going to cover a lot of the basics. Let me go over really quick what my intent was for each of the kinds of cards. So the practitioner, or rather, actually let me describe the cards really quick. So there are cards and they fall into one of 5 categories. They're meant to each interact with one of the 5 mechanics of the game, or pillars if you will, of the game. So the hunter and its flip, the practitioner, are going to be your primary skill guys. Hunters of the Silver Hills is not meant to be like a tactical strategic game where you're managing exact placement in minis. Neither is there any kind of initiative or time management system. Players are just acting when it most makes sense, and it's the responsibility of all players at the table to make sure everyone's having fun. So if someone finds that they are maybe commanding too much of the table or experiencing themselves in the limelight a lot, the responsibility is both on that player, the game master, and really everyone at the table to maybe say, hey, you've spent enough time doing this, let's give so-and-so a try at something, and we'll move on to them. But okay. So back to that combat that we were talking about with the practitioner fighting the drunk. Combat can be very broad stroke, it can be very specific. You might roll to inflict specific kinds of injuries or deal a little bit of damage, but generally what the goal is in combat is the players are stating how they want to defeat the foe, and if the method is correct and they roll adequately, or even if they don't roll adequately but they can survive the incoming attack, they're going to succeed in the method that they've described. So you can box out a drunk, you might slay a fey creature with an iron weapon, kill a vampire by stabbing it through the heart with a stake, decapitate a zombie, really what have you. It's more about the method than it is your exact ability. But as far as actually going toe-to-toe in combat, the practitioner and hunter have a lot of points and skills that are going to be involved in fighting, meaning that they also get opportunities to not take damage. Alright, next on the list here we have the champion. The champion's flip is going to be the aberrant, which I did not have this very organized when I got started. The champion and the aberrant are very much meant to be your, hey, we're going to poke our nose in maybe places that we can get bit or stung. These guys, you're going to want to take charge in going into dangerous places, or maybe you're going to want to put them in front of dangerous entities. They're very well suited for taking damage, and that has a lot to do with their injury track, as well as some of their other abilities, or their skills rather. Their injury track has a number of injuries that simply say resist, and those are never going to really hinder what the champion or the aberrant are doing. Both cards, however, do have a weak point at a great cost, so if they receive a lot of damage and they don't wish to mark their mortal wound, they can take an injury to their weak spot or weak point and buy off the damage, and hopefully that'll give them enough time, or their team members enough time, to solve whatever's going on. Next we have the Noble, and the Noble's flip is going to be the Underlord. The Noble and the Underlord, they are very much meant to be about the map. These are people who have enough resources that they can purchase businesses, own land. Really, the Noble has an undescript, indispensable amount of wealth that no other card really should have access to. And the Underlord maybe isn't as wealthy, but he has bodies. He has a gang, an unknown amount of loyal gang members who are willing to serve him to get tasks done. The Noble and the Underlord are able to throw their status around to get the players into landmarks and other locations that might be restricted to people who don't have their status. And they can fund or cause the production of projects that might actually physically change the map. The Underlord, for example, has a hideout feature, and every time I've had a player describe their hideout, I always get them to mark it somewhere on the map. I want it on the map there as a place that the players can go visit, as kind of their own personalized haven. Next up on the list here, we have the Driver. So the Scout and the Driver are going to be flips of each other, and their whole thing is actually about moving around the map. So the Scout is able to lead the party by use of a familiar or his own intuition nature through the wildlands, treating movement through wild or uncivil tiles as though they were civil tiles. So it's only going to take 1 hour if you have a Scout in your party to move from tile to tile. The Scout is also going to be really great at utilizing natural resources to solve other sorts of challenges that may come up. The Driver is a little more niche. His car, even though it can technically travel into different terrains and such, is really meant to be on the roads. And for that reason, when you're driving on the roads, time is cut down very much from 1 hour to 15 minutes, so long as you're driving into civilized tiles only. For the purpose of time management, that is a great save, especially during a time crunch. And then last but not least, we have the Oracle, and the flip of the Oracle is going to be our Detective. Their whole purpose is they very much have a keen eye or sense of fate. So whenever fate draws a card, the Oracle and the Detective at any time get to look at that card and know what it is without the knowledge of any other players or anyone else having seen it, but they are not allowed to say what the card is. They only simply say things like yes or no, good or bad. So for example, if a player wants to tempt fate, they may defer to the Detective or Oracle and be like, hey, is this a good idea? The Detective or Oracle can look at fate there and be like, you know what? Maybe this isn't serious enough for us to provoke fate. Let's hold that off for another time. The whole point of the Oracle and the Detective, they have access to divination, which allows them to see things, the future, different realities, or maybe even specific kind of divinations. This is meant to give them access or insight on certain kinds of clues or evidence that the players might have actually missed. So for example, let's say they're in a room and they miss a key piece of evidence that's meant to give them that really important clue to move on in the story. The Oracle and Detective especially are really good at locating that, and the Oracle especially is good at knowing if perhaps, let's say, certain actions might cause certain consequences. So they're all about knowledge and hidden knowledge and knowing secret things within a certain degree. It wouldn't be a mystery game after all if there was just an ability that told you what the monster was and how to defeat it. Another thing I want to touch on really quick is the Hunter and the Practitioner, or rather the Hunter and the Detective, both have access to something called Deep Sight. And Deep Sight is an ability within the game which is taught to certain members of the college that allows them to see things for what they really are. While they are channeling Deep Sight, it's up to the player to describe, what their character is experiencing, but generally, characters that are utilizing their Deep Sight, which is something it's meant to be just something they can switch on and off, First, you really should declare that you're using deep sight to view something. But while you're using deep sight, you're not perceiving the physical, tangible world. So everything around us that you perceive otherwise normally, you stop perceiving, and you're only perceiving things like true things or strange entities, dark magics. Think of every single kind of sensory spell in Dungeons and Dragons, but while you're using that, you can't see anything else, and it's meant to have some kind of limited range, or at least within the purposes of the story, some kind of changing or shifting range. There are monsters which may be able to hide themselves from deep sight, but overall, this should let players figure out if, let's say, somebody is a ghoul, or if there is some kind of, let's say, a werewolf running around. They might be able to spot the werewolf and then figure out that, okay, well, we should probably get some silver. Our hunter used his deep sight. This guy definitely read as a werewolf. We're going to go get something to solve that. But a lot of the descriptions of what the players see are going to be up to the game master. So the game master may give something very clear, like, yep, his aura is something that you are familiar with as being werewolf aura, or you might use deep sight on a character and the game master might give you something like, this person has a kind of spirit that is not natural for a human and might give no further information. It's all going to be based on the actual, whatever mystery you're in and the flavor of the game that you guys are running. This world, I provide a world with Hunters of the Silver Hills for people to use as a platform, but I highly encourage you to take these cards, mod them, make your own cards, make your own setting, take these abilities and change them to fit a story that you want to tell. This whole game really was a project for me to tell stories about monsters that I thought were really cool that had really weird ways to slay them. And so from that premise, I built this whole project, and I really hope you guys have as much fun with it as I've had building and testing it with my friends. If you have any questions about the game, you're very welcome to leave some down below in the comments. And if you want to pick up the game, you can get it for free on DriveThruRPG at a pay-what-you-want price. This is kind of a weekend warrior sort of project, so it's not something I'm actively updating, but I'm definitely trying to build content to publish. I'm trying to update versions of the book to fix things like formatting errors or grammatical issues, or even just making rules more clear. And I very much am looking forward to people playing the game, getting feedback, and I'm trying to put some stuff together where I make some tutorials or even just some examples or sessions of play with the people I'm playtesting with and some friends. So please do keep your ear out for that, and I do hope you enjoy. Happy hunting, everyone.